Democrats going with this? If Mondami is the face of the Democrats on the East Coast and Katie Porter is the face on the West Coast, I don't know if that's great politically for that. Socialism is like a dating profile. Things look great until you meet up in the real world. For example, Bernie Sanders, his big thing was always bringing single-payer health care to our country of 340 million. But when liberal, tie-dyed Vermont tried to do it for a population of 626,000, it collapsed like that poor in the Oval Office last week.
The Democratic Party seems to be drifting further to the left, and Bill Maher warns that this direction could harm the party's long-term prospects. Known for his blunt style, the veteran comedian offered a clear warning. If the party leans too heavily into socialist ideas and distances itself from moderate voters, it could seriously weaken its chances in 2028. His remarks were direct, unapologetic, and difficult to ignore. If you want candid commentary without the usual political polish, this heated analysis is worth paying attention to.
Has a clear choice here, very clear. One wing is saying don't ever use the word socialist again, and one is saying,
I am a democratic socialist!
Clear, huh? So how do we decide who's right? Well, it turns out we don't really have to flip a coin. We have the evidence. In 2024, 13 Democrats won. In districts, Trump also won. All moderates. This isn't rocket science. All the left-leaning think tanks have done autopsies on 2024, and they all came up with the same message: move to the center. Even the New York Times, which did so much to promote woke politics, now says the partisans are wrong. Moving to the center is the way to win. And Democrats should recognize the party moved too far left on social issues after Obama left office.
Never one to soften his views, Bill Maher warns that if Democrats keep moving toward socialist ideas, they could end up giving Republicans a major political edge. In his view, embracing labels and policies that many Americans see as divisive would energize conservative voters, strengthen the Republican base, and boost the GOP's position in presidential races. Rather than expanding their appeal, he argues, Democrats might actually shrink it, handing their opponents a powerful talking point during campaigns. Maher's solution is straightforward: shift back toward the political center. He believes the Democratic National Committee should concentrate on practical issues that matter to moderates and independent voters instead of focusing on strict ideological standards. According to him, winning elections isn't about satisfying the loudest voices online. It's about building a wide and lasting coalition. If Democrats want to stay competitive in 2028, he suggests that practical strategy, not ideological purity, will give them a better chance.
I think that stuff that happened before their appearance on the planet didn't really happen, but it did. We've run this experiment many times, and the results are always obvious. Here's capitalist South Korea at night from space. Here's socialist North Korea. Yeah. In 1990, Venezuela was wealthier than Poland. But then Poland, finally free of Soviet-style economics, went all in on capitalism. And now their economy is as big as Japan. And people there have high wages, low inflation, cars, vacations, homes. Meanwhile, Venezuela traded capitalism for Hugo Chavez's socialism for the 21st century, which turned out to be like socialism in the last century, or any century, a f***ing mess.
Bill Maher argues that socialism is still a difficult concept to sell to American voters because many instinctively view it with suspicion. In his view, most people don't feel the need to study political theory to form an opinion. They believe history has already shown how large socialist systems can unfold in other countries, often linking them with slow economic growth, shortages, and heavy government control. Whether that perception is completely accurate or not, Maher says it still holds significant political influence. And in the world of elections, perception can shape outcomes just as much as policy. He also believes many voters remain wary of proposals that appear to concentrate too much power in Washington. After decades shaped by free market ideals and the idea of personal opportunity, a large portion of the electorate is hesitant about dramatic ideological changes. Within that cultural context, Maher suggests that openly embracing socialist ideas could push away key swing voters. In a tight national race, he warns, even a small shift among moderates might be enough to tip the scales and potentially cost Democrats control of the White House.
Latin America's richest countries into one of its poorest. Low wages, high inflation, shortages, outages, 8 million people fleeing. If you think New York can somehow reinvent this wheel, you're in for a rude awakening. Zoran can't make your wishes come true. You're thinking of Zoltar.
Bill Maher often points to developments in New York City as what he sees as a real-time political test. With Democrats supporting candidates who openly describe themselves as democratic socialists, including Zoran Mandani, Maher argues that the situation is more than just a local story. In his view, it may hint at the broader direction the party could take nationwide. While such candidates may energize progressive activists, he suggests their rise could also leave moderate voters, the group that often decides national elections, feeling uncertain. Maher also points to history as a cautionary lesson. He believes candidates who strongly emphasize ideological labels sometimes struggle to maintain broad public support over time. Although Mandani's long-term influence in New York is still unclear, Maher predicts that ambitious campaign promises may eventually run into the realities of governing. For him, political success ultimately depends on delivering results rather than relying on rhetoric, and if expectations aren't met, he believes voters will make their frustration clear at the ballot box.
Democratic socialism is like a dating profile. Things look great until you meet up in the real world. For example, Bernie Sanders, his big thing was always bringing single-payer health care to our country of 340 million. But when liberal tie-dyed Vermont tried to do it for a population of 626,000, it collapsed like that poor in the Oval Office last week. Bernie, AOC, Mandani are not Democrats. They'll be the first to tell you that. They're democratic socialists, and that's a very different thing, and I don't think people know that yet.
Bill Maher argues that this is the point where, in his view, confusion often begins. He believes many voters see the term democratic socialist as significantly different from simply socialist, assuming the extra word softens or fundamentally changes the ideology. Critics like Maher, however, say the difference can be largely cosmetic. In their view, adding democratic doesn't necessarily alter the central focus on a larger government role in the economy, redistribution policies, and expanded state authority. Supporters of democratic socialism respond that the label reflects a commitment to pursuing reforms through elections and constitutional institutions rather than authoritarian systems. Maher, though, questions whether the practical outcomes differ much once those policies are implemented. In politics, he notes, branding can make an agenda sound more appealing, but voters ultimately judge results rather than terminology. If the policies resemble ideas many Americans already view skeptically, he argues, simply rebranding them may not protect Democrats from political backlash at the ballot box.
People realize we already have a lot of socialism. Social Security, Medicare, Medicaid, unemployment insurance, food stamps, veterans benefits, Pell Grants, COVID-era payments, farm subsidies, disability payments, Fannie Mae, Freddie Mac, corporate bailouts, and the jobs program that is building weapons the Pentagon doesn't even want. All that is socialism, much of it appropriate to soften the edges of capitalism, but the DSA are radicals about this concept, and radical economic policy is always ineluctably married to radical social policy. Their platform, for example, calls for completely open borders. They're for what Biden was doing, but more. You think you're going to win an election on that?
Bill Maher also points to immigration as what he sees as a political vulnerability for Democrats. He references criticism of border management during the administration of Joe Biden, noting that some voters interpreted it as a sign of weak leadership. For those voters, he argues, border security wasn't simply another policy debate. It became a broader test of competence and control. When people believe the system is disorganized, Maher suggests, they may turn toward alternative candidates, even if they have mixed feelings about them on other issues. What concerns him most, he says, is the perception that some democratic socialists continue supporting positions that voters have already shown unease with at the ballot box. In Maher's view, that signals a party that hasn't fully confronted the political consequences of its earlier strategy. In a deeply divided country, he warns, repeating the same approach while expecting a different result could come at a high cost, especially when public perception often determines the line between winning and losing elections.
Defund the police or military in the streets. Either MAGA's crypto crony capitalism or city-run grocery stores No, I don't want that. I want a Democrat who reassures me if you like your Whole Foods, you can keep your Whole Foods. Governor-elect Spanberger once said about Biden's presidency that, quote, nobody elected him to be FDR. They elected him to be normal. Normal. You know, at this year's DSA convention, or as it's commonly known, Comic-Con, get this, you had to submit a photo of a negative COVID test to get in. In 2025. Yeah, no one wants to.
Bill Maher sums up his advice to Democrats in two simple words: be normal. In his view, the party doesn't need a dramatic ideological shift or constant culture war clashes to remain competitive in 2028. Instead, he argues it should emphasize stability, practical solutions, and messaging grounded in everyday concerns. Maher has often criticized what he sees as excesses in progressive rhetoric, warning that it can drive away more voters than it energizes. According to Maher, most Americans aren't focused on ideological purity tests or viral political moments online. Their attention is on everyday issues: employment, inflation, public safety, and economic opportunity. When political messaging drifts too far from those concerns, he warns, voters may lose interest or start looking for alternatives. His argument isn't about abandoning core values, but about adjusting how those values are communicated and prioritized. To him, moderation isn't surrender, it's strategy. If Democrats want to broaden their support, he believes they must reflect the outlook of mainstream America rather than relying solely on the loudest activist voices.
It seems to me that there are two pillars that this country is founded on. One is democracy, and one is capitalism, free markets. And it seems like one party wants to get rid of one, and the other party wants to get rid of the other. Right? The Republicans are not that, democracy is just not number one on their list. It just isn't. It isn't. It's behind Christianity and a few other things. And the Democrats, I mean, I read these, 74% are for democratic socialism. Only 16% favor capitalism. Is this going to be a country that I don't recognize in 5 to 10 years if we don't have these two pillars?
Bill Maher has said he's surprised by polling suggesting that a notable portion of Democrats are open to the idea of socialism. In his view, that level of acceptance is politically risky, especially because the term still carries strong historical and emotional associations in the United States. He argues that many voters link socialism with countries where highly centralized economic systems have struggled with slow growth, inefficiency, or declining living standards. Whether those comparisons are fully accurate or not, Maher believes public perception alone can influence tight elections. From his standpoint, many Americans instinctively connect socialism with reduced opportunity and weaker economic performance. He warns that this perception provides Republicans with an easy political argument, enabling them to portray Democrats as ideologically extreme. Maher doesn't suggest that every progressive policy is harmful, but he emphasizes that labels matter in politics. If Democrats lean too strongly into an identity that a large part of the electorate distrusts, he argues, they could unintentionally give their opponents a clear and powerful campaign message, one that might shape the outcome of the next national election.
Democrats going with this. If Mondami is the face of the Democrats on the East Coast and Katie Porter is the face on the West Coast, I don't know if that's great politically for that.
Skeptics argue that the rise of figures such as Zohran Mamdani and Katie Porter may not be a promising sign for Democrats. From their perspective, the growing visibility of candidates connected with democratic socialism suggests a wider ideological shift that could make moderate and independent voters uneasy. Rather than broadening the party's appeal, critics contend it could narrow the coalition and give Republicans a straightforward line of attack. For these observers, the concern extends beyond any one individual. It centers on the long-term direction of the party's identity. When voters perceive a movement away from practical governance toward stricter ideological positioning, public trust can begin to fade. Some analysts warn that if the party doesn't recalibrate, there could be lasting electoral consequences. Whether that prediction proves accurate remains uncertain, but the debate highlights an ongoing struggle within the party over its identity, electability, and future strategy. Without finding a stable balance, critics caution that democratic competitiveness could slowly weaken over time.
Democratic socialists at another of their conventions, they were told to make jazz hands instead of clapping. lest some delegate suffer sensory overload. And also, and I'm not joking, they were told not to be wearing, any aggressive scents.
Please don't go into that space with anything that's like an aggressive scent, for instance, right? Because that's going to be difficult for people.
Oh, for f***'s sake.
Bill Maher didn't mince words when criticizing what he sees as the Democratic Party's increasing fixation on woke politics. For him, this isn't just a passing trend, it's a potential electoral weakness. Maher argues that when party leaders prioritize symbolic battles and niche ideological disputes over practical, everyday issues, many voters feel left out. That frustration quietly builds among Americans who simply want tangible solutions to real-world problems. What worries Maher most is the combination of an openly socialist economic agenda with aggressive cultural progressivism, which he believes can make the party appear extreme. Whether that perception is fair or not, it can carry serious political consequences. Elections are often decided in the center, and when a party strays too far from what most voters consider mainstream, its overall appeal can shrink. In Maher's view, winning isn't about doubling down, it's about recalibrating before voter dissatisfaction translates into lost elections. He warns that Democrats risk eroding public trust if they drift too far from the center. Moderation, pragmatism, and relatability, not ideological extremes, are what he sees as essential for victory. To remain competitive in 2028 and beyond, Maher argues, the party must reconnect with mainstream Americans and focus on their everyday concerns. And that concludes today's analysis. If you found it helpful, like the video and subscribe for more content like this.